My name is Rachel Cooper. I'm 41 years old, and if there's one thing my career in law enforcement has taught me, it's that the deepest wounds often come from the people you love the most. I've been a police officer in Seattle for nearly 2 decades, walking the thin blue line between chaos and calm, order and heartbreak. But tonight, the pain in the hospital corridors had nothing to do with gunshots or overdoses. It was family. That's a wound nothing in the academy prepares you for. The waiting area at Swedish Medical Center was a strange crossroads of grief and expensive perfume. The kind of place where hope and despair drift in and out under the relentless flicker of fluorescent lights. I stood by the vending machines, hands shoved in my jacket pockets, trying to ignore the low hum of conversations and the steady beeping of distant machines. It was late, but in hospitals, time is elastic. Every minute stretches and folds in on itself, thick with memories and regret. There she was. My sister, Lauren, 2 years younger, but always miles ahead in everyone else's eyes. She was perched on one of those uncomfortable plastic chairs, scrolling through her phone, her posture perfect even at midnight. Her dress probably cost more than my monthly rent. Every so often, she'd look up, scanning the room as if waiting for someone important. I watched her for a moment, feeling an old ache, half love, half irritation. She told the nurse at the desk, loud enough for me to hear, and my sister's still chasing her little police dreams, bless her heart. She always knew how to make an audience. Lauren was always the golden child. Married a successful lawyer right out of college. They had a mini mansion in Bellevue, 2 kids in private school, a new Tesla every other year. She was PTA president, yoga devotee, the queen of neighborhood social media groups. If there was a prize for a most likely to win at suburban life, a Lauren would have a shelf full of trophies. And me? The family's wild card. The one who couldn't settle down, who never brought a date to Thanksgiving. The cop who still worked nights, still wore her hair in a no-nonsense bun, still showed up at Christmas dinners in a department-issued windbreaker. That's what Lauren's friends whispered, anyway. Never mind that I made detective before I turned 30, or that I'd spent years working homicide while she hosted wine tastings. None of it seemed to matter when family was keeping score. Tonight, though, wasn't about me. Not really. It was about our grandfather, Jack Cooper, the reason both of us were even here in this hospital, waiting for news that would change everything. Grandpa Jack had been our North Star, the man who taught me how to bait a hook, change a tire, and never, ever back down from a bully. He was a World War II vet, a retired firefighter, a legend in our little North Carolina hometown before he followed us out to Washington in his 80s, to see how real people live, he'd joked. Now, stage 4 cancer had whittled him down to skin and bones, but the spirit was still there. He insisted on telling me the old war stories, even when his voice was a rasp and his hands shook so badly I had to hold his coffee. You keep your chin up, Ratch, he'd say, squeezing my fingers. Doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. You know who you are. It was his favorite line, and I tried to believe it. But family makes you doubt. Family, with their bright smiles and sharper words, their judgments hidden behind good intentions. My mother, Susan Cooper, hovered near Grandpa's room, pale and tired, her eyes tracking Lauren's every move. Dad, Frank, stood by the window, arms crossed, silent as a mountain, watching the city lights blur with the rain. It was always like this, us orbiting around Lauren, waiting for her approval, even when we pretended not to care. I wandered into the hallway, needing space. The hospital felt smaller at night, claustrophobic, like every door hid another secret. My phone buzzed. A text from Lauren. You coming back in or are you working? They're about to let us visit. Short. Clipped. No warmth. I sighed and walked back, boots squeaking on the tile. Inside Grandpa's room. The lights were dim, the machines loud in the quiet. He looked so small in the bed, a man who'd once lifted me onto his shoulders to watch fireworks on the 4th of July. Lauren stood at his side, perfectly composed, dabbing at her eyes with a silk handkerchief. I wondered if she kept those just for occasions like this. Grandpa opened his eyes, searching the faces around his bed. When he saw me, he tried to smile. Hey, Rachel. You working tonight? I managed a smile. Not tonight, Grandpa. I'm just here. He squeezed my hand weakly. You always show up. That's what counts. Lauren cut in, her voice soft but somehow carrying the old competitive edge. She's always busy with her cases, Grandpa. Seattle would fall apart without her. The room went awkwardly silent. Dad cleared his throat. Ratch does important work, Lauren. We all know that. Lauren's mouth twisted, just a little. Of course. It's just, well, not everyone can be running around the city at all hours. Some of us have families to think of. Mom shot her a look, but no one said anything else. I felt suddenly, completely tired. More tired than after any double shift, any night spent waiting outside a suspect's house in the rain. That's how it always was. Lauren performing for the crowd, me hiding in the background, wondering if I'd ever be seen for who I really was, not just the cop, not just the other daughter. But tonight, with Grandpa slipping away and the family teetering on the edge of something we couldn't take back, I realized maybe it was time for the truth to come out. If you'd asked anyone in our hometown of Asheville, North Carolina, they'd have told you Lauren and I were just like any other sisters, one sunshine, one storm cloud. But growing up in the foothills, the truth felt sharper than that. Lauren's world was Friday night football games, prom queens, cheerleading uniforms, and plans for the perfect wedding. She had this golden hair that caught every stray bit of sun, and a laugh that made adults stop and watch her as she walked by. Everybody expected her to be somebody, and she lived up to it. Me. I grew up in the shadow of that spotlight. I didn't mind it most days, honestly. I was the one who begged Grandpa Jack to tell me war stories, who learned how to change a tire by the time I was 10, who stayed late after school to help clean up the gym after Lauren's homecoming wins. Where she had scrapbooks full of ribbons and trophies, I had stacks of library books, mostly detective stories, police procedurals, anything that gave me a window into another kind of life. Dad liked to joke I was born with a badge in my pocket. I'd tag along with him to his garage, handing him wrenches while he tuned up old Chevys for the neighbors. He'd ruffle my hair and say, "You got your grandpa's stubborn streak, kid. Use it well." I learned to love the smell of motor oil and metal. To this day, the sound of a socket wrench can still settle my nerves better than yoga or meditation. Lauren was the first to leave. Scholarship to Duke. By her sophomore year, she was already dating Mark, the future attorney, and mapping out a life that would look perfect on a holiday card. She called home twice a week, her voice bubbling with stories of sororities and summer internships in Raleigh, where she wore pencil skirts and sipped lattes at sidewalk cafes. I stayed back, working shifts at the diner and riding along with the local cops when they'd let me. Everyone assumed I'd marry some hometown boy and never leave. But I had other plans. At 18, I packed my bags and drove cross-country to Seattle. Alone, broke, but burning with a kind of stubborn hope. Police Academy wasn't easy, but I thrived on it. Every hard run, every grueling test, just made me more certain this was where I belonged. The distance between Lauren and me grew, quietly, like a crack in the foundation you can't quite see. When she got engaged, Mom threw a huge party. Dad danced with her around the kitchen. Grandpa gave a toast, voice trembling with pride. "My little girl's making her way in the world," he said, raising his glass. I smiled and clapped, but I felt invisible. My news was met with polite nods, no champagne. No toasts. By the time I graduated from the academy, Lauren was already living in the suburbs, planning baby showers and hosting dinner parties. My visits home were fewer and shorter. I'd drive up from Seattle in my old Ford, bring donuts from Pike Place Market, and watch as Lauren's life unfolded in neat, well-lit Instagram squares. New house, new car, vacations in Maui, birthday cakes taller than her kids. Conversations at the dinner table had an edge. "So, Rachel, are you still patrolling those rough neighborhoods?" Lauren would ask, as if my work was a phase I'd soon outgrow. "Yep," I'd reply, forcing a smile. "Still protecting and serving." Dad would change the subject, asking about Lauren's new granite countertops or Mark's latest case. The unspoken rule was that we didn't talk about the things that mattered, about what kept me awake at night, about what I saw on my shifts, about the lives I tried, and sometimes failed, to save. Mom worried I'd never find the right man because I was too independent, as if marriage was some prize for a life well lived. I can't count the number of times Lauren suggested I take a break, try a different career, maybe even go back to school for something less dangerous. She meant well, I think. She just couldn't imagine why anyone would choose uncertainty, late-night calls, or the constant risk of not coming home. I started to measure time in calls for service, in the faces of people who'd lost everything, in the days I didn't tell my family about a close call because I didn't want to worry them. It's funny, you can spend your whole life wanting to be seen, only to realize the people closest to you have been looking right through you the whole time. In Seattle, I built a life that was mine, a small apartment in Ballard with creaky floors and mismatched mugs, a circle of friends who understood why I sometimes went quiet after a tough shift, and a sense of purpose that didn't need to be explained. Still, every time I came home, I became the version of Rachel they remembered, the one who was never quite enough, never quite right, always almost there. Now, standing in that hospital hallway, watching Lauren command the room like the homecoming queen she'd never really stopped being, I felt all those old memories pressing down. Part of me wanted to walk away, let her have the spotlight. But another part, the one Grandpa Jack had built up, bit by bit, knew I couldn't just disappear. Not this time. You'd think after all these years, I'd have learned to let my sister's comments slide off me. But it's never that simple with family, is it? The real wounds aren't from the things they say out loud, but from the things they never bother to ask. Back in Seattle, my life was hectic but straightforward. My job was demanding, but at least it made sense. A crime was either solved or it wasn't. You either caught the bad guy or you didn't. But family was full of unsolvable cases, old grievances that never made it into the official report. Family dinners were the worst. Every Thanksgiving or Christmas, I'd drive down to Lauren's immaculate house in Bellevue, carrying some store-bought pie or a bottle of red wine, always hoping this time would be different. Lauren's house was always perfect, with the scent of cinnamon candles and the hum of a playlist that could have been lifted straight from a lifestyle blog. I'd sit at the long, farmhouse-style dining table while Lauren held court. Mark just got promoted to partner, as she'd announce, squeezing her husband's hand, and the table would erupt in congratulatory chatter. My kids both made the honor roll. We just got back from Whistler. There was always something to celebrate, something picture-perfect to share. When it was my turn, the room grew quiet. "How's work, Rachel?" Mum would ask, her voice polite but strained. "Oh, you know," I'd say, keeping it vague. "Busy." Lauren would smile tightly. "I don't know how you do it, running around the city at all hours, always something dangerous happening." Mark would nod, as Seattle's not what it used to be. "Glad you're out there, though." I'd smile back, not mentioning the adrenaline spikes. The times I chased suspects through alleys, the paperwork that never seemed to end, or the nightmares that sometimes followed me home. I could never seem to find the words to make them understand. Once, after dinner, as I was helping Lauren load the dishwasher, she leaned in with that conspiratorial tone she reserved just for me. "Don't you ever get tired of it?" as she whispered, glancing over her shoulder to make sure no one was listening. "You're not 25 anymore. Don't you want something more normal? Stability?" She said the word as if it was the Holy Grail. I shrugged. "I like my work. It matters. Not everyone gets to say that." She didn't answer, just shook her head with that sad, patronizing smile. The worst part wasn't what she said. It was how everyone in the family just seemed to agree without saying a word. Even Dad, who'd once seemed proud of my determination, started focusing more on Lauren's life. He'd talk about her neighborhood, her kids, her vacations. I became the background noise at family gatherings, the afterthought. One summer, when Grandpa Jack was still well enough to sit out on the porch, he tried to get the two of us to talk. "You girls ever think about how lucky you are to have each other?" he asked, voice rough from too many years of cigars and firefighting. Lauren smiled, squeezing his hand. "Of course, Grandpa. Rachel and I are just different, that's all." He looked at me, waiting for something. I wanted to tell him the truth, that I felt more like a visitor in my own family, that sometimes I wondered if Lauren would even notice if I stopped coming home. But I just smiled and sipped my sweet tea, letting the silence fill the space between us. There were times I almost stopped coming. When you spend your days talking to victims' families, notifying next of kin, comforting strangers who've lost everything, the last thing you want is to feel invisible in your own home. But something always pulled me back. Maybe guilt, maybe habit, maybe hope that things could change. The breaking point finally came at our cousin Jamie's wedding. I'd just gotten off a stretch of night shifts and drove straight from the precinct to the reception, still smelling faintly of stale coffee and rain. Lauren, radiant in a blush pink gown, found me by the bar. "You look tired," as she said, her voice half concern, half critique. "You should really take better care of yourself, Rach. You're not getting any younger." She laughed, but there was something sharp in her eyes. Later, after a few glasses of champagne, she cornered me in the hallway outside the bathrooms. "Be honest, Rachel," as she said, her words slurring slightly. "Don't you ever wonder what it's all for? Chasing criminals, running yourself ragged. You're almost 40. Don't you want more out of life? A husband? Kids? You can't be a cop forever." I felt her words like a slap. It's not just about me, Lauren. Someone has to do this job. Someone has to keep people safe. She rolled her eyes. Sure, but at some point, you have to grow up. I wanted to yell, to make her see all the things I'd done, the lives I'd changed. But the words caught in my throat. Instead, I just walked away, back into the reception where the music was loud and nobody noticed my absence. That night, as I drove back to Seattle under a moonless sky, I decided I was done explaining myself. My life was mine. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. After that wedding, I stopped trying to bridge the gap. I showed up for birthdays and holidays out of obligation, but I kept my answers short and my heart guarded. I let Lauren have her spotlight. Let her friends and family nod along to her stories about charity galas and school auctions, PTA meetings and summer getaways to Lake Chelan. I was just the Seattle detective, a curiosity at best, a disappointment at worst. But the thing about working in law enforcement, especially as a woman, is that you get used to being underestimated. You learn to move through rooms quietly, to listen more than you speak, to prove yourself twice as often just to be seen as equal. That skill came in handy at home, too. By the time I hit my mid-30s, I was a detective with a reputation for getting results. My captain trusted me with high-profile cases, serial burglaries, missing persons, the kinds of things that made the evening news. I spent more nights in the precinct than in my apartment, built a second family out of fellow officers and baristas at the late-night coffee shops near Pioneer Square. Some of those friendships were the realest I'd ever known, people who understood why you'd forget a birthday, why sometimes you just needed silence at the end of a shift. They never asked why I was still single, or why my car was always dusty and full of empty coffee cups. But even as I was building a life in Seattle, Lauren's voice lingered at the back of my mind. It echoed every time a case went sideways, every time I questioned if I was making any real difference at all. You can't be a cop forever. Don't you want more out of life? I saw my own doubts mirrored in the eyes of the parents I notified, the victims I comforted. People always wanted to believe in happy endings, in neat resolutions, in the idea that pain had a purpose. But the reality was messier, and most of the time, all I could do was be there, steady and unflinching, while the storm passed. Still, I poured everything I had into my work. The more complicated the case, the deeper I dove. I became fluent in reading crime scenes, in the body language of liars and the weary patience of the innocent. I wrote meticulous reports, kept my emotions tucked away under layers of professionalism. Promotion to detective sergeant came at 36, and with it a bigger office and even longer hours. I led a team through some of the toughest cases of my career, some that made the papers, most that never would. But none of that earned me a place at Lauren's table. What really broke something inside me was a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. Thanksgiving, 2 years ago. I'd stepped out on the back patio for a breath of air and caught Lauren on the phone with Mom, her voice just a little too loud, her tone full of exasperation. She's almost 40. Mom. She still lives in that tiny apartment, chasing criminals like she's a character in some TV show. No serious boyfriend, no savings, no plan for the future. She says she's a sergeant now, but she's probably just filling out paperwork in some basement. I don't even know what to say to her anymore. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass, willing myself not to cry. After that, I stopped trying to justify my choices. I stopped bringing work stories home. I smiled through Lauren's announcements, new car, new kitchen, ski trips in Vermont. When she asked how things were in the big, scary city, I just shrugged and changed the subject. The less I said, the easier it was to keep my distance. But there was always one person who never let me fade into the background: Grandpa Jack. Even when his hands started shaking and he needed help getting up from his recliner, he always wanted to hear my stories. "Tell me about the last collar, Ratch," he'd say, eyes twinkling. I'd sit on the floor by his feet, the way I had as a little girl, and tell him just enough to make him proud, but not enough to worry him. "You know you're making a difference, don't you?" he'd ask. "I try, Grandpa," I'd reply, not sure I believed it. When he was diagnosed with cancer, the whole family circled the wagons. Lauren, as always, took charge, organized the meal trains, managed the calendar, set up the CaringBridge site. She sent out group texts about visiting hours and grocery needs, careful to sign each one a love, Lauren. She cried the loudest at doctor's appointments, made sure everyone saw how hard she was working to keep things together. I did what I always did, took the overnight shifts at the hospital, held Grandpa's hand when he couldn't sleep, listened to his stories even when the words came slow and jumbled. We watched reruns of old westerns with the sound turned down, the two of us sharing a quiet that felt sacred. One night, during a lull between nurse visits, he squeezed my hand. "You did good, kid," he whispered, his voice frail but sure. I tried to answer, but the lump in my throat was too big. He just nodded. "You always show up. That's what matters." I never told anyone what he said. It was mine, proof that I'd been seen, if only by the one person who really mattered. When Grandpa Jack's cancer worsened, the world narrowed to the hospital's fluorescent glow. Lauren coordinated meal deliveries, fussed over spreadsheets of visitors and pain medication logs. She updated relatives by group text, always signing off with hearts and prayers. But at night, when the halls were empty and the beeping of monitors was the only sound, it was usually just me and Grandpa. I took the graveyard shifts because I could handle the silence. In the small hours, Grandpa would drift in and out of sleep. Sometimes he'd squeeze my hand, his fingers still surprisingly strong. "You're a good girl, Rachel," he'd mumble, voice thick with sleep and painkillers. "You do things your own way. World needs people like that." Other times, he'd wake with a start, his eyes unfocused, and ask about the old days in Asheville or the firehouse or his war buddies. I always answered, even if it was the same story he told me a dozen times before. Those nights blurred together, shifts at the precinct, quick showers at my apartment, then back to the hospital. Sometimes I napped in the uncomfortable family lounge, badge still clipped to my belt, shoes kicked off under the chair. Lauren rarely saw those hours. She'd breeze in the next morning, fresh and put together, with a latte and a new silk scarf. "I don't know how you do it, Ratch," as she'd say, glancing at her watch. "I couldn't handle being here all night. Too depressing." I'd just shrug, trying not to resent her for what she couldn't give. We all cope in our own ways. But I noticed the little things. How Lauren would raise her voice when talking to doctors, how she'd summarize every update to the group chat like a press release. She wanted everyone to know she was in control. I think that was her way of fighting fear. Sometimes I wished I could do the same, but my training had taught me something else. Sometimes, the only way through fear is to face it alone, in the dark. As Grandpa got weaker, families started visiting more. Relatives flew in from the East Coast, friends stopped by with flowers and casseroles. But the most consistent presence, other than me, was Dad. He'd sit for hours in the corner, staring at the city lights beyond the window, quiet and solid as ever. Every so often, he'd rest a hand on my shoulder as if to say, "I see you." He never spoke much, but when he did, it mattered. "Proud of you, kid," he told me one night, his voice almost too soft to hear. "Doesn't matter what anyone else thinks." In those final weeks, Grandpa was lucid only part of the time. When he was, he'd talk about honor and duty. Sometimes he'd pull me close and whisper, "Don't ever let them tell you this work isn't worth it." And then, one quiet Tuesday morning, he slipped away. Lauren was at a Pilates class. I was there, holding his hand, the only witness. The hours that followed moved in slow motion. The doctors were kind, the nurses efficient. Lauren arrived breathless, mascara smudged, and collapsed against me in sobs. I held her, even though my own tears had already dried somewhere deep inside. The funeral arrangements fell, naturally, to Lauren. She turned it into an event: flower arrangements, eulogies, invitations sent to everyone in her address book. Grandpa would want a big turnout, as she insisted. I stayed out of it as much as I could, helping only when she insisted. My grief was quieter, private. At night, I found myself replaying old conversations with Grandpa in my head, searching for something I might have missed. On the day of the service, the church was packed. Lauren floated from group to group, hugging people, accepting condolences with practiced grace. She gave a eulogy that left everyone in tears, speaking about Grandpa's courage and legacy. I stood at the back, hands folded, badge hidden beneath my dress. After the church, we moved to the cemetery. A cold wind whipped through the rows of headstones as the honor guard performed the flag folding. Lauren dabbed her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. Thanking guests, never breaking character. But then something happened no one expected. A black sedan with government plates pulled up. Out stepped Chief Madeleine Carter, Seattle's chief of police, trailed by 2 aides. The crowd shifted, uncertain. Lauren's voice faltered. Chief Carter approached the grave, her presence commanding immediate attention. "I'm looking for Detective Sergeant Rachel Cooper," she announced, her tone firm but warm. The crowd fell silent. I stepped forward, feeling everyone's eyes on me. "Chief Carter," I said quietly, extending a hand. She shook it, then addressed the group, her words echoing over the cemetery. "Sergeant Cooper has dedicated her career to protecting this city. She's led teams, solved crimes, and put herself at risk countless times, often without recognition. Her grandfather's legacy of service lives on through her." I felt the ground shift under my feet. Lauren looked at me, stunned, and for the first time, truly at a loss for words. For a moment, the cemetery was as silent as a church on Christmas Eve. The wind hushed, and every set of eyes shifted toward me: family, friends, neighbors who'd known me as a quiet kid tagging along after Grandpa Jack. Even Dad looked a little surprised, as if he were seeing me for the first time in years. Chief Carter's words seemed to echo through the rows of gravestones. "Sergeant Cooper has saved lives, protected communities, and upheld the very best traditions of service. The Seattle PD is proud to call her one of our own. And today, I'm honored to announce that Rachel has been promoted to Captain of Special Investigations, a role she's more than earned." There was a ripple of applause. I felt my cheeks flush with heat, not from pride, but embarrassment. This wasn't how I wanted recognition. Not here, not now, and certainly not in front of the people who'd always measured my worth by what I lacked. Lauren's mouth fell open, her perfectly composed face showing the first cracks in its veneer. For a split second, she looked like the little sister I remembered, uncertain, searching for her footing. Chief Carter offered a crisp salute. I returned it, years of discipline guiding my hand. Then she moved on, leaving me at the center of a circle I'd spent years trying to avoid. After the ceremony, people I barely knew approached me. "Didn't realize you were so important, Rachel. We're lucky to have someone like you in the family." I had no idea. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" I just nodded, offering small, practiced smiles. Lauren was nowhere to be found at the reception. I finally spotted her out in the garden, pacing, her phone pressed to her ear. I watched her for a moment, uncertain if I should interrupt. Eventually, she ended her call and looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. "You never told us," she said, not quite accusatory, but not gentle either. I shrugged, looking past her to the view of Mount Rainier in the distance. "Did you ever ask?" She flinched as if I'd slapped her, and for a moment, I almost apologized. But I didn't. Not this time. I always thought you were running away from something," she said quietly. "Maybe I was," I replied. "But mostly, I was running toward something. I needed to do work that mattered." Lauren dropped her gaze, twisting her wedding ring. "I didn't know. I just thought. I don't know what I thought." "You thought I was playing cop." "Pretending," I said, my voice soft but steady. "You never saw how hard I had to fight just to be taken seriously. How many times I wanted to quit. But I couldn't. Not when there was so much to do." A silence stretched between us, full of all the things we'd never said. "You always seemed so sure of yourself," she whispered. I almost laughed at that. If only she knew how many nights I'd driven through the city wondering if I was making a difference, if I'd ever really belong anywhere. "Not really," I admitted. But Grandpa was. He believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. Lauren's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away. "He was proud of you." "I know he was." I nodded, feeling the heaviness in my chest shift just a little. "Lauren, I don't need everyone's approval. I just wanted to be respected. Not for my job, but for who I am." She hugged herself, her fancy black coat pulled tight. "I'm sorry, Rachel. For everything. For not asking. For assuming." I put a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to apologize. We just see the world differently." She looked at me, her expression more open than it had been in years. "Will you tell me about your work? Not the details. Just what it's like for you?" I smiled, a real smile this time. "Yeah. I think I'd like that." That was the start of something new between us, a quiet understanding, the first fragile bridge over a lifetime of misunderstanding. For the first time, I saw her not as a rival, but as my sister, floored, scared, and longing for connection just like I was. That night, as the family began to leave and the groundskeepers lowered Grandpa into the earth, I stood beside Lauren and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not triumph, not relief, but peace. The city lights of Seattle glimmered in the distance, and I knew that whatever happened next, I was finally ready to let go of the past. After the funeral, the family gathered at Lauren's house for what was supposed to be a meal of comfort, though it felt more like another performance. The house was immaculate, filled with food from a fancy caterer, flowers arranged just so, and Lauren's children tiptoeing around in their dress shoes, uncertain in all the noise. But something had shifted. For once, people weren't just circling Lauren, listening to her stories about travel soccer and her husband's big cases. Instead, conversations kept turning to me. My uncle asked about police work. What was it really like? Cousins wanted to know if I'd ever chased someone through a dark alley, or if I'd ever been afraid. Even Dad looked at me differently, like he was finally seeing the person behind the badge. It was flattering, in a way, but also exhausting. Years of going unseen had made me wary of the spotlight. Lauren stayed quiet, picking at her food, her phone mostly face down for once. Every so often, she'd glance at me, and I'd see a question lingering on her lips, but she'd swallow it back. It was easier for her to avoid the conversation than admit how little she actually knew about me. Later, as the crowd thinned and the dishwasher hummed in the background, Lauren found me sitting alone on the back porch, watching the rain blur the city skyline. She sat beside me, tucking her feet under her, careful not to get her dress dirty. "You know, I always thought I had you figured out," she said, her voice tentative. "Turns out I didn't know you at all." I looked at her, seeing not the polished woman who ran every PTA meeting, but my little sister, lost, uncertain, reaching for something she couldn't name. I didn't make it easy, I admitted. I figured it was safer to keep my life to myself. Family's supposed to be the place you're most understood. But sometimes it's the loneliest. Lauren was silent for a long time, staring out at the wet garden. "I spent so much time trying to be perfect," as she whispered, trying to make everyone happy. "I guess I thought if I did everything right, people would love me more. That I'd feel important." I understood that more than she knew. You are important. Just not in the way you thought you had to be. She shook her head, a rueful smile flickering. "It's funny. I always felt like you were running away. But maybe you were just running towards something that mattered." We sat together in the quiet, the rain drumming a steady rhythm. "I'm sorry for all those times I made you feel less than," Lauren finally said. "I wish I'd asked about your life. About what you saw, what you felt. I was so busy showing off my own world, I never really looked at yours." For the first time in a long time, I felt the knot of resentment in my chest loosen. "We can start now," I said. "Ask me anything." "Really?" She looked up, eyes shining, and for once she didn't look like the untouchable star of the family, just a sister longing for connection. "Were you ever scared?" she asked softly. "All the time," I admitted. "But that's how I knew I cared. You can't be brave if you're not scared first." We talked long into the night, about cases I could share, about the people I'd helped, about the ways the job had changed me. Lauren listened, really listened, in a way she never had before. She shared her own fears, too, the pressure to keep up appearances, the loneliness that sometimes crept into even her busiest days. Somewhere between the laughter and tears, something healed between us. It wasn't dramatic, no grand confessions or movie-worthy reconciliations. Just a slow, quiet understanding, a recognition that we were both more than the roles our family had assigned us. When the last guests left, Lauren hugged me tightly at the door. "I'm proud of you, Rachel." "Really?" she whispered. I hugged her back, realizing that maybe, just maybe, I was proud of her too, not for her perfection, but for her willingness to finally see me. That night, as I drove home through the wet Seattle streets, I didn't feel like an outsider anymore. I felt like myself, seen, respected, and loved. For the first time in years, I slept without dreams. The weeks after the funeral passed in a blur. Seattle's endless drizzle against my apartment windows, late shifts at the precinct, the city rolling forward whether I was ready or not. For a while, everything felt raw, like the world had pressed a reset button I didn't ask for. But underneath the surface, something subtle was changing. Lauren started texting me, not the usual broadcast messages about family plans or holiday logistics, but real questions. How was your night shift? Ever have a case you just can't shake? Sometimes, she'd call on her way home from carpool, her voice soft, tentative. We never talked for long, but for the first time, I felt her listening instead of waiting for her turn to speak. Dad called, too, once just to say he'd read an article about my team in the local news. Proud of you, Ratch, he said, his voice thick. You always did things your way. Grandpa would have liked that. It hit me harder than I expected. All those years I'd wanted him to see me, not as the other daughter, but as Rachel, the cop, the woman who kept going even when it was hard. Now, finally, he did. Even Mom thawed a bit. She started bringing over leftover casseroles, asking quietly if I was eating enough, if I needed anything for my apartment. She'd never say it, but I knew it was her way of saying, I love you. At work, I found myself walking taller. My promotion to captain brought new challenges, a bigger team, higher stakes, more pressure. But it also gave me a platform, a voice in decisions that mattered. For the first time, I could shape how my department responded to trauma, how we supported victims, even how we looked after our own. I started a mentorship program for young officers, especially women, who still faced the same doubts and second guesses I had. I ran into Chief Carter in the hallway one afternoon. She grinned, clapped me on the shoulder. Heard your family's proud of you, as she teased. I laughed, shaking my head. Some days, I even believe it. She looked at me, serious for a moment. Don't let anyone make you small, Cooper. You earned this. But not every change was smooth. There were moments, still, when I felt the old ache. At a birthday dinner for Lauren's youngest, I watched her orchestrate the party, perfectly in control, laughing with other moms who wore matching Lululemon and talked about their next ski trip. For a moment, I wondered if I'd ever fit in. But then Lauren caught my eye from across the room and smiled, a real, warm smile. She mouthed, a thank you for being here. And somehow, that was enough. One rainy Thursday, she called just as I was getting off shift. You want to get coffee? I want to hear more about what you do, really hear it. I hesitated, but then said yes. We met at a little place near the market, tucked between a used bookstore and a record shop. No pretense, just two sisters and mugs of strong coffee. She listened as I described the cases that stuck with me, the kid I'd helped reunite with his mom, the neighbor who started a community watch after a string of break-ins, the nights I came home bone-tired but grateful. She told me about her own struggles, how lonely it felt sometimes, the fear of not being enough, the guilt she carried when she snapped at her kids or when her marriage felt more like a partnership than a romance. We laughed about our childhood, the rivalry that never really mattered, the times we teamed up to prank Dad or sneak out to the movies. For the first time, our differences felt like strengths, not wounds. On the way out, Lauren stopped me by the door. I spent so many years envying you, Rachel, she admitted. I just never said it. I thought you were brave, that you knew who you were. I wish I'd had that. I smiled, squeezing her hand. We both wanted what the other had, I guess. Walking back to my car through the drizzle, I realized something. Sometimes healing doesn't come all at once. Sometimes it's 1,000 small moments, a look, a question, a shared memory. Sometimes you have to let go of who you thought you should be to finally become who you are.